Thank you, Lindy, and good morning to everybody here. It's a really amazing group of people, and I must say I feel quite in awe to stand here and represent DG Baleni and make really the first input content-wise to this conference. I'm going to be really sharing some background to the President's response, and then some progress with regard to work that is underway and has been, some of which has reached milestones. So I have a PowerPoint presentation that I'm going to try and, there we go, okay. I want to start with this quote from the President's response, which lays the foundations for a living response in the sense that it's intended as a platform to mobilize the different sectors of society around this effort, which is existential in many ways. I often think of the metaphor of a emergency or a doctor who goes to a place where there's a plague and succumbs to the plague and is attempting to help, although dealing with the challenge as well. So I think that's a context that I wanted to put out to this group. It's an opportunity to build new pathways around this state building effort. And I think what's important also to recognize is this response is in the context of the National Anti-Corruption Strategy, which is located in a whole of government, whole of society approach, and is fundamentally about building state capability. So this is how we went about responding to the recommendations in the Commission. It was a very big report, as you will all know, voluminous. We were quite methodical and in a way mechanistic in how we set about approaching this, which was to tabulate 353 or 352 if you remove a duplicate recommendations into a big spreadsheet and begin analyzing and allocating the different recommendations into different categories and different implementers and owners, communicating as the reports came, were released and handed over by the Commission, letters from the President to affected ministers, affected institutions, informing them of the findings and requesting from the executive responses. And then we compiled those responses against the recommendations and really followed this iterative approach of trying to formulate a coherent and comprehensive response. We then synthesized through that process a draft response to the President and the President's advisors to then take the final decisions around some of the issues that were perhaps more contested. As you can imagine, a process such as this, which creates in a way, an accelerated pathway for contestation that's maybe been in play for a long time, to perhaps get visibility and for decisions to be made. So that was the process. You can see the table just provides a kind of indicative sense of the recommendations. The vast number of them are recommendations for criminal or other forms of investigations. Those relate to specific people or companies where the Commission recommended further investigations. So if one takes a fairly blunt and rudimentary look at the numbers, about 60% or just less than 60% of those recommendations are focused on responding to events, specific events. The others are reform initiatives, reform proposals. And I think that's where we particularly look at from the executive side. The decision was taken to say all criminal and investigative matters are handed over to the appropriate mandated agencies to be dealt with according to their procedures and policies, with a recognition of the need for independence, as well as a recognition of the context from which we were emerging. So this, again, just a high-level summary. I think talking to that, the key elements of this response, first, contextualizing this response in the work of the Commission, the 4 years of, and the context in which this was being presented. Then the first part looks at dealing with perpetrators or enablers, the kind of reactive side of things, and then the reform initiatives and two really sort of categories around the kind of, of reform initiatives. And then some examination of implementation, which is always the space where reality is to be found. So here is a progress by numbers in terms of the response. There were 60 actions in the President's response, commitments, which we are monitoring and facilitating and enabling and keeping on track to respond to the 350 recommendations. So a number of them are bundled into a single recommendation, or so it's not exactly apples to apples, and these kinds of statistical headline numbers of 20%, 27% completed are, I think those of you that work with data and work with numbers will know that, what are they? Lies, damn lies, and statistics. So, not to say that these are lies, but they, one can, one recommendation, which is the referral of 193 criminal prosecution recommendations, is just one of the 60. So it's huge, and it takes you right into the reforms underway around the criminal justice system, et cetera, et cetera. And so the 4 slides I'm going to show you now will take you into the engine room a little bit. I don't want to take too much time, but basically we have ticked off, because you will know that government is currently under very much this kind of RAG system, green, amber and red, and we like to mark it off, and we can say we are achieving or not achieving, and the auditors can be happy with us. But I think here we can see a lot of the progress being made around moving the legislative reforms into Parliament, and achieving some of the operational reforms. But I think what's important to note here is a green isn't better than an amber in this. The work that is underway is critical, and many of these are going to take many years to achieve. So again, a checkbox approach makes sense in trying to communicate, but it's not necessarily going to give the full picture. So I'm going to, unfortunately, it's not terribly visible, and I don't have the very good sight of it. I think I'm going to just. I don't think these slides are useful in this context, so I'm going to jump through. We are preparing a detailed report that will be made available against these 60 actions. We have been tracking them at the level of each action, and we have been tracking against the recommendations themselves. So there is that kind of rigor at the level of recommendation that we will be sharing with the public. So let me jump through this. I think this does start to talk to the idea that nothing is happening. I think there's a view that nothing is happening, and I don't think that is evidenced by the facts. We now have 38 of the 193 recommendations for criminal investigations in court. There are 9 court cases. So, yes, I mean, one could say there should be more, there should be less, but the wheels of justice are turning. And I think we're seeing more and more of these cases making their way into court. So 9 cases in court involving 47 individuals and 21 companies. And then asset recoveries. The asset forfeiture unit has recovered 5.4 billion rand that has been recouped. It is a broader sample than the specific 27 recommendations in the Commission's report, but all of those recoveries relate to state capture type crimes. There are many more billions, 14 plus billion, where there are forfeiture or freezing orders in place. And we also see not insignificant amounts of money being recovered by the Revenue Service as a result of evidence at the Commission. So a collection of taxes that would otherwise not have been paid. So one can always argue should be more. The Commission refers to 50-something billion tainted by state capture. One can make that qualitative assessment. This, again, just gives a sense of the data. These are the specific areas of investigation and inquiry of the Commission where there were criminal referrals made. I'm sorry that the slides may not be very visible, but you can see there's a blue and there's an orange, and the orange are much bigger, and those are the number of individual criminal referrals for prosecution or further investigation, and the blue are showing you which are actually in court now and on public record. So you can see some of the investigations like PRASA and if I'm correct, ESCOM. Yeah, some of those, the specific recommendations, although these state-owned enterprises, there are cases in court already, but the specific recommendations in the Commission are not yet in court. Those are under investigation. So there is, the system is processing those recommendations. Then just another kind of snapshot to try and pull this all together. These are 9 pieces of legislation, legislative amendments or new bills. 2 of them have been assented to, the Electoral Laws Amendment Act and the General Laws Amendment Act around the money laundering. So those 2. But then there are 7 others that really taken together start to create quite a significant basis for change around tightening up some of the mischief. Many of the responses to some of the really significant reforms proposed by the Commission, such as an independent anti-corruption or public procurement anti-corruption agency, are dealt with through other processes like the Public Procurement Bill, which has quite a significant life in NEDLAC and in civil society, and is a source of a lot of discussion and debate. So one can argue about the quality of the response, but these things are moving. The harmonization of procurement laws, the legislating around transparency, creating this public procurement office, which has powers of search and seizure, and has powers to issue legally binding instructions, etc. So, and I think perhaps the last one here, which the NPA amendment bill, which really returns a capability for prosecution-led investigation that was very successful in the late 90s in terms of addressing priority crimes such as car hijacking, domestic terrorism, and the last one has just evaporated. I'm sure everyone will remember which one it was, but does anyone? Anyway, it'll come to me as soon as I sit down. But there were three. This was the investigating directorate that emerged under the popular name the Scorpions. But the investigators under the permanent investigating directorate on corruption will have the powers to arrest, take statements, the powers of police. Which is a significant step towards creating a more robust anti-corruption capability. I know there will be many who argue that, no, well, it's still not independent, but there are processes underway and commitments to wrestle with some of the more vexing challenges in relation to the independence of the NPA, issues of funding, issues of authority around appointments, etc. So, I think I'm probably eating too much time here. 5 minutes over or 5 minutes left? Thank you. Okay. I think I'm too far ahead. Okay. All right. And then this slide just takes you through the remaining 7 legislative reforms that are responding to the Commission's recommendations. And so what I think everyone will be aware of is this very substantial review of legislation around whistleblower protection and undertaken by the Department of Justice. And that really does move the dial on creating a different kind of environment for whistleblowing. I'm going to just pulling out some of the recommendations there. Criminalizing threats against whistleblowers, shifting the burden of proof to those that are disputing whistleblower allegations. So some of these very important legislative tools that deal with the kind of punitive or weaponizing court processes to undermine whistleblowers and just force them to give up because they don't sit on the war chests of the powerful. And then, okay, and then this one, this slide, just is another extract from the President's response referring to the National Anti-Corruption Advisory Council, which rooted in civil society. And several of the councillors are here. Recognizing, again, I think to the opening comment, this engendering a national consensus or a national dialogue. And I think it's important to recognize the emergent nature of this work. I think we have a particular frame which says almost an auditor's frame. We have this huge crisis of accountability, and we just add more and more controls without necessarily recognizing the fragile capacity building that needs to take place to do anything more than a kind of mimicry. Enough pressure on a system that is not capable will just produce a fiction because how does one survive? So I think it's important to recognize that as an underlying enabler. And I think what we see here in this diagram, which I snapped at a meeting of the National Anti-Corruption Advisory Council yesterday, which was looking at and receiving reports on the research being done into the anti-corruption institutional architecture. And I put it here because I think it really does show and point to the sea change that I believe is starting to happen beneath what is visible. And if we look here, this map, which is going to be meaningless to you because you can't see it, but it talks to this idea of vicious cycles that are currently running, and it identifies, I think, 4 or 5. I think Gareth Newham will be able to speak better to this, but of these vicious cycles that are working together to create the current capability of the society to deal with corruption. And we're all implicated. It's not someone that you can point at. It's systemic. And these 5 vicious cycles have entry points. And that diagram, if we could go into more details, has they're vicious cycles within the formal systems. So within the legal and judiciary, and fairly old systems that are easily exploited for the corrupt. You can endlessly appeal if you've got a war chest. And then below the line are the informal vicious cycles. And this reference to parallel systems of governance and the machine that will make things go very smoothly or very difficult. And these hidden cultural, organizational factors that you won't find written anywhere but are driving power and systems, and I'm sure we all know them very well. But the articulation of these are so important because we can begin to see entry points in a strategy that isn't simply another document that we put on the table and attempt to fix a problem that exists deeper in the society and in the systems. So I think by concluding, okay, one more. Am I over here? Or can I one? Okay, all right. So these are just 2 projects that I've picked up here because they talk to building new administrative capabilities, building interfaces between departments and sectors and spheres, which is very difficult in government because of the way the incentives are set up. We talk about the silos of government, but looking at the incentives that drive the silos, and these 2 look at an administrative level, how do you build the capabilities to track SIU recommendations at a level of a single recommendation to discipline X official in X municipality? How do you track that and keep sight of the thousands of recommendations that are emanating and hold accountability? Similarly, there's another project which is an action in the President's response, which is really gaining quite a lot of traction, which is building the central register, which recognizes that while there are capabilities within spheres of government and within state-owned enterprises to know who's been dismissed or who's resigned to avoid disciplinary cases, there is no way, if you are in local government, to go and find somebody whose CV is in a national government or in a public enterprises. And what we saw from our analysis of the SIU recommendations, that there were several people who resigned to avoid accountability and therefore don't have any restriction on applying for other jobs. But so we're building a slow and steady, using payroll databases, an ability to go a single port of a place to go and check whether a person has been dismissed or has resigned, and then to ask further questions. We know that disciplinary processes are not straightforward and have been abused to silence people. But these kinds of iterative efforts to solve problems and build capacity and awareness, I think, are really important. So finally, just to recognize, and this is again a quote from the President's response, to recognize the work that was done, the courage, there were many people who were isolated voices at times and persecuted and paid huge personal costs. And I think many of us probably in this room are those people, and how we need to continue to recognize that this will require courage. You know, fight corruption, corruption fights back. But building this, I think this platform, certainly in the work in developing the response a year ago, the first conference was very significant to bring together a platform of all this expertise and to be able to access it. So thank you very much to the organizers of this. It might seem that government sits, you know, in a kind of reluctant isolation, but it is really valued. This. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. I had a duck here last year to keep me company, but you're actually saying that it doesn't matter if it quacks like a duck. It might not be a duck. But thank you very much for all that work that the Presidency is doing. The duck's here somewhere, but I think the duck's tired. Can I open up very quickly for questions? I mean, if comments and questions, only burning ones. I'm keeping you here just in case there are questions.
I think many of the answers will be in the room.
Absolutely. You don't have to answer all of them. Are there any questions in the room or comments to this input that the Presidency has just made? I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If you can just hold on to those numbers, and then I'm going to close it because we don't have a lot of time. Right. We'll start with Sam. It will just come this way and end up here. I can't hear you. It's not on. It's not on.
Okay. I just want to ask about what seems to be a very weak political response, perhaps because a majority of the principles are implicated. But just to give one example, I mean, why haven't we expelled the Chinese ambassador? We have Chinese state-owned enterprises that have been, majorly complicit in paying commissions, in inverted commas, which have devastated Transnet. Transnet is still struggling to recover from that. We've had absolutely no action in relation to that, except from SARS and the Reserve Bank, but nothing political.
I want to ask how you're dealing with the subterranean politics and power networks that exist in the public service. Because the more I think about it, the more, I suppose, both despondent and cynical I get about how you break those cycles without actually completely changing the politics and the senior levels in government.
I was going to ask that last question. My name is Mbongiseni, so I'm going to ask a different one, a very quick one. You said a report is going to be published where you're tracking the implementation of these recommendations. When can we expect that report? And going forward, what is the frequency of your accounting to the public going to be?
He reminded me that you should say your name. Where are you from?
Hi, I'm Janine Rauch from the Enhancing Accountability TA facility. My question is, given the fiscal constraints that government is facing, what impact are those having on the planned response?
Yes, the last one.
My name is Mavuso Msimang. Two questions. One is, in that progress report that's got red and blue and all those colors, I missed the color for things that have been completed, investigations that have been completed, and prosecutions have taken place. Second one is, it's a little bit difficult, there's a moment of embarrassment when some of the people who were recommended for prosecution seem to end up in cabinet, and the Zondo had to swear them in. Thank you.
Can I just check if there's anything online? This one. Let's take that one and then give to Jonathan to cover those that you can manage.
Yeah.
And then people can catch up with your tea. Please don't run away.
No, thank you so much. Oh, sorry.
One from online.
From Anwar Abu Bakr. Does government have an indication of an end date to the multi-year reforms? Are the reform programs embedded to cushion against changes that may arise during the transition between administrations after elections?
Jonathan, you can pick and choose and answer the best way you can. Thank you.
Let me try and, in a way, I think, provide a composite answer to a number of the questions that are above my station. Although I may have views myself. Some of the questions are things that we need to wrestle with. I don't know who said it, but somebody said you get the government you deserve. And so, the state in relation to society, and it's a complex dance, but so many of these, so maybe just quickly, in terms of the weak political response, I think it's also important to recognize that not everything takes place in full view and of the society. And I think particularly things where there's, very delicate geopolitical questions at play and very pressing challenges in terms of the locomotives and getting parts, and SARS going after South China Rail and saying we need this money back, and South China Rail was saying, well, then you're not going to. We control the entire market for all of your locomotives. So I think things are happening. I'm not involved in that, but I think those questions are difficult to answer, certainly for someone like myself. Again, I think many of the questions are questions I can't answer in terms of decisions that are made by the leadership, but in terms of how do we deal with subterranean networks, and it's about building state capability. It's about identifying that map that we showed, about recognizing and articulating the actual environment in which we work, and not just simply saying this is the legal environment and why isn't it happening, but also recognizing how does power work, what is happening, what is actually happening, what's written, what's not written, and trying to bring what is written and what actually exists closer and closer together, so that you have a convergence of the law and the practices in society. I think that's the task. And it's a task that comes from we can sit on one side and another, but we are one system. And then fiscal constraints. I think, in a way, some of the opportunities arise precisely because no one's got the budgets are not available. So it's shifted so much from, we need to make sure we spend the budget, to say, where can we find savings? So a project like the Central Register has allowed for utilization of existing opportunities within the system. When you've got lots of money available, you can endlessly get new. So you can duplicate and proliferate. When you are in a constrained environment, you start to say, oh, but we can use this for that. So for example, the Central Register is built on a piece of tech that the DPSA already had, and all it did was just repurposing it. So we managed to do that without putting a single tender out or a call for proposals. We just got the officials from 5 different departments together and say, okay, which piece of the puzzle do you have? Which piece of the puzzle do you have? You've got this piece of legislation. Your minister can issue that regulation. and we've got a common purpose here. So I think that's the opportunity. Complete prosecutions, I think Advocate Johnson would be much better placed there, but we do receive the kind of headline. So I think if I stand under correction, we have had 3 cases finalized in terms of judgments. So there's the first one is the around the former chairperson of SAA, the contempt, the disclosure of a witness against the direction of the. So that was the guilty verdict. The former HOD for Free State Housing was convicted on 2 counts and received, I think, if I speak under correction, Advocate Johnson, custodial sentence. But I think I'm correct. And then again another guilty verdict for someone not complying with the notice from the commission, PRASA executive. But yeah, I think no significant judgments in the bigger cases which are underway. End date for the reforms, I think, as long as it takes, I guess, because many of the reforms have their own internal timeframes. So legislation, project plans at individual levels. But I think what is necessary is to continually adjust to the environment and make sure that there is a capability within the state to constantly diagnose and have an approach that is able to respond to emergent challenges. Solve one problem, another one will emerge. And that ability to have that problem solving orientation, I think, is the capacity that needs to be built.